Everyone, welcome. Again, my name is Blair Embry. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Prison Yoga Project, and we have our amazing guest here with us, Nikki Myers, and I'll read a little bit about her as well before we get started. Nikki is an accomplished speaker and teacher. Nikki is an MBA, ERYT 500, yoga therapist, somatic experiencing practitioner, addictions recovery specialist, and Ayurvedic specialist. Born from her struggles with addiction and work with countless students, Nikki is the founder of Y12SR, a yoga of 12-step recovery. Based on its theme, The Issues Live in the Tissues, Y12SR is a relapse prevention program that weaves the art and science of yoga with the practical tools of the 12-step programs. Nikki, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for asking me.
And how we love to start this off and kind of get all of us on the same page is we love to see the way that our guests facilitate a little centering opportunity. And when you're ready, will you lead us in that?
I am so happy to do that. And this centering is such a tool for me, right? It just is such a tool. And hopefully you'll see why, right? So the invitation for all of you right now is to do what I love to call find the middle, right? And so find a posture that allows you to settle and restore. One where you can find a sense of steadiness and stability in your being. Maybe that's sitting, maybe it's standing, whatever it is that's going to offer you in this moment just a place to settle, just a place to find a sense of stability, a sense of foundation, a sense of steadiness in your being. The middle is this place between too much and not enough. It's this place between too loose or overly loose and too tight. It's the space that is between the duality that is so much a part of our culture. The place between good, bad, or right, wrong. And in this space, once you find that sense of stability in your being, the invitation now is to soften the grip. Soften the grip of any tension anywhere in your body. Now, again, this isn't avoid or run away. The invitation is to soften. And then check in with your energy. And if there's any tension there, can you just soften? And then the mind, maybe softening the grip of doubt or of fear. Just softening the grip. And then in the space that's created, once we find the middle and soften the grip, in that spaciousness, invite in your breath. Simply let your awareness come to the very tip of your nose and start to notice the flow of the breath, the wind in and out of your body. And just see if it's possible. Invite in a breath that's smooth without a lot of jerkiness or jumpiness. A breath that's even. The inhale and exhale are about the same length. A breath that's deep yet effortless. A breath that's continuous, where the inhale follows the exhale and the exhale follows the inhale. And a breath that's quiet. This is a breath that brings balance. It brings integration back to our nervous system. So nourishing your whole being in this place of finding the middle. And then with me, please take a big, big, deep breath in. Exhale this one out through your mouth and let your jaw relax, a place where we have a tendency to hold so much. And then when you're ready, simply open your eyes if they were closed and welcome yourself back in the space. I am grateful to be here with you. Thank you for asking that, Blair. That is a tool. I mean, I took a little extended version of it with that centering, but it's something that I use, I know, at least 20 times a day. When I can feel myself, going to the too much or to the not enough, if I can just pause and find the middle, right? If I can just keep coming back to that place, it's just something that recenters my whole being. So it's been a very, very useful tool for me over the course of the years. So I always like to start with that.
It's so good and so potent. I love how you made space for breath and made space for the awareness.
Yeah.
Thank you. As soon as you start, I was like, Nikki's the best. So again, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I feel like I always comment that the centering is supportive for me as well. So again, thank you.
Love it.
Will you tell our audience what brought you to yoga?
Yeah. There's so much that brought me to yoga, but when I really, because I was introduced to yoga in the 70s, and I knew that there was something there. But at that point in time, I was in the throes of all kind of levels of addiction, right? And so while I knew that there was something there was a pull in another direction, right? Men and sex and drugs and money and all of those things, right? So while I recognized that there was something there, that pull, what I always love to say about that, no matter what my intentions, my dysfunctional behavior was much stronger than any intention, right? And so the dysfunctional behavior got me. And it was some like 20 some odd years later when I came back to yoga. And, by that time, I had been through the course of jails, institutions, and death, and all the things associated with an addiction lifestyle. And so I knew that I needed something else. So this will get me into the story a little bit. Is that all right with you?
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. So I went through all the throes of and all the things of an addictive lifestyle, and I can talk about that, but it really is summed up in that phrase that comes from the 12-step programs: jails, institutions, and death, right? And the death part of that, jails and institutions, is pretty self-explanatory, but the death part of that was the death of not only so many people that I've seen and continue to see just die from this disease of addiction. It was also the death of my own soul. I came into 12-step rooms in 1987. And when I walked into those rooms, I really was a person who, number one, I could barely put a sentence together. And there was a death of my own soul, right? And I was really, really aware of that as I walked into those rooms. So it's that level of death that I'm speaking about. And my first 8 years of recovery, right? In 12-step rooms, I found people who really did love me till I could learn how to love myself, right? And so it was just this nurturing back to life from a soul that was spiritually bankrupt. I mean, just bankrupt. And so my first 8 years, I did a lot of things. I came back into, I went back to school, and I don't know, was that it?
Sorry, that was one of our admin techs.
Oh,
But she muted. Yeah.
Okay. That's all right. Should I go on?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, I love it. I love it. So I went back to school. You know, I got a lot of the things that I lost in the throes of addiction back. Right. I finished my MBA. I finished my undergrad degree. I did all of that good stuff. And I found myself in a position that after 8 years, you know, of coming back from this whole ordeal, after 8 years in recovery, I ended up in relapse, right? And then, you know, came back from the relapse, and 4 years later, relapsed again. And making a long story short, the real big deal with, particularly after that second relapse, is I recognized that that I needed something else, that there was something missing, right? After the first relapse, I found yoga again, and I started really getting into the depths of yoga. And I kind of decided in that period that yoga was going to be all I needed, that all I was going to need is yoga. I didn't need the 12-step program anymore. And then it was after that that I relapsed again. So after that second relapse, I came to recognize that I needed both, and that these things needed to be tightly coupled, that there needed to be almost, you know, this coupleship between the cognitive work that I was doing both in therapy and in the 12-step program, and then all the somatic work that I was doing in yoga, that I needed those things deeply coupled and deeply combined for healing force for me. And so it was after that second relapse, that actually Y12SR was born, right? Recognizing that there were a lot of other people that were just like me, that needed this deep level of coupling between the cognitive work and the somatic work. And I'm grateful to say that so it was 8 years clean, then relapse, and another 4 years clean, then relapse. And now it's been 21 years since that last relapse. And it is, I would assert, it's been this deep coupling of these things that has allowed a platform, right, that supports sustainable recovery in a whole different way, right? And so, yeah, it's been that.
And thank you for coming on and continuing to share your story. I know that you've been in front of so many audience and on these podcasts. And so I'm also curious, how did you get to a place where even your own story didn't re-trigger you, or being like kind of like continue to be swept in victimhood or whatever narrative that you might find yourself in? Will you tell us about that work and that practice?
I will. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So when I'm doing all this speaking and all the things I do, I usually start out the same way with an introduction. And I think the reason that I do this is because it gives a lens into exactly what you're speaking about here. And so I always say, you know, I'm Nikki. I'm all the things you said. I'm an MBA. I am a somatic experiencing practitioner. I am the founder of Y12SR. right? All of those things. I'm a yoga therapist, all those things. And the big 3-letter word is and. And I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a codependent. I'm the survivor of both childhood and adult sexual trauma. I'm a love addict. I'm a recovering debtor spender. And I'm the mother of 2 living and 1 deceased child. I'm the grandmother of 5. I'm the great grandmother of 3 3/4. I got another great grandchild coming any second now. So, and I'm so excited, right? Yeah. Um, and all of those things are true. And I'm the lover of all things dogs, right? I'm the lover of nature, and I love saying all that in the same sentence, right? That all those things are true, right? What I've discovered, and I think this gets more to the answer of your question, is that when I make one part of myself bad off one wrong, and another part of myself right and wonderful, praiseworthy, what happens is there's a very a fissure in my whole being, right? And there's this internal war that goes on, because all of those things are a part of my experience. All of those things are a part of who I am, right? And I'm often almost think about this, like I always say, the older I get, the more my favorite movies are like Pixar cartoons and things like that, right? But there was this one not too terribly long ago that was Inside Out, right? And it was so, and this is exactly what I'm speaking about, right? How to gather and include all parts of myself, because we all belong here, right? We all belong here. So when I have learned to honor all parts of my being and have them all participate and be integrated into, and that's for really what yoga means, right? Yoga means integration. It means union. It means all of those things, right? And so being able to invite everyone to the party and all parts of myself has made it so that, there is no piece of myself that wants to take over to the degree that there could be victimhood, or there could be any of those things, right? We're all here together in this integrated piece of ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, one more thing, Blair, let me speak about this. The Yoga Sutras, right, which I love the study of, speaks about this as well, right? I don't remember exactly the sutra, but it's in the first pada, the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras, where it speaks to, it.
Shoot, I'm not sure if it's just me or.
Hopefully in a way that can support other people, because there's no longer a charge associated with it.
I'm so sorry, Nikki. I think we cut out a little bit. Will you start from the beginning of the sutra?
Yeah. Okay, can you hear? Is it okay now?
It's okay now. We got you back. But,
all right. The sutra speaks to that the experience, becomes, if you will, a memory without a charge, right? And for me, that's when I knew that I could use my experience in order, hopefully in a way that's going to support other people in the world, because there's no charge associated with it. Part of my experience was I was in commercial sex work, right? And I can talk about being in commercial sex work today, like I would talk about owning a Toyota, right? They have the same level of emotion and feeling. I can talk about it in that way. And that's how I knew, right? Because it no longer has a charge associated with it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I pulled up a Rumi quote that my teacher says, and I feel like it's really emblematic of Y12SR, this work of 12-step, and also of yoga. And I just wanted to read it now because it feels like, calling all of yourself home. And then also just this invitation to everyone, right? And it doesn't matter how many times you relapse, you come back. You're welcome. Come back. So this quote is, "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again. Come, come."
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. I will often use the other Rumi piece, the one, most of us know, the guest house, right? And that's that whole idea that the line in that one is welcome and entertain them all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, and that's all these pieces, right? And that's the invitation to welcome and entertain them all, right? So often, because of the duality in our world, it's always, this is good, this is bad. That part of you is bad, right? This part of you is good, right? Good, bad, right, wrong, all of those kinds of things, right? And until I have discovered, I had to welcome and entertain them all, recognizing that they were all here to show me something, right? And being appreciative and honor what it is that every piece was here to show me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you spoke to us a little bit about this coupling piece of where yoga and the 12-step program support each other. I do think we have a lot of yogis within our community, so you can get deep into the philosophy if you want, because I'm really excited about that too. Because I hear you tapping into non-duality here as well. But will you tell us about the framework of Y12SR?
Absolutely. What happens often at a Y12SR meeting is we have almost a structure like a 12-step meeting. So there is a discussion, right? Or topic, or a reading, or a quote, right? And then we have a group conversation around that. And then there is this, what we love to call trauma-informed themed yoga practice that's based in whatever the spiritual principle is that is at the root of the topic of the meeting, right? And it's really funny because the reason in 12 steps, the actual reason for working the steps is to begin to embody the spiritual principles that sit underneath the steps, so that I can walk in those spiritual principles in my life, right? And so the whole idea in a meeting or a conversation is to key in on that spiritual principle and what it means to really embody that spiritual principle. And it's funny, though not surprising, that the spiritual principles that sit underneath the steps look very much like the spiritual principles that are introduced in yoga and in the Yoga Sutras. They look a whole lot like the yamas and niyamas, right? They look a whole lot like those things. So those are really the themes of the practices. How do you embody those things? What does it really mean to embody acceptance? What does it really mean to embody surrender? What does it really mean? What does that, what does it mean to walk in that and embody in humility, right? And embody those in our lives. So the practices are themed around just that, right, how it is, where it shows up on our mat, right, and how it can show up off our mat and into our lives, right? So those kinds of things. So it really is based in what I love to call the practical. The other thing it does is take, for those who are familiar with 12 steps, there are all these beautiful little pithy, quotes and sayings, right, that are a part of the language of 12-step and 12-step programs, right? Little things like there's a phrase often used that says, keep coming back, right? And the question becomes, what are we keeping coming back to? That this is more than just words or more than just a pithy phrase. I can embody what it means to keep coming back, right? Keep coming back for me means keep coming back to finding the middle. Keep coming back to that sense of stability and steadiness in my being, right? So that, when I'm somewhere and I get this trigger or this activation in my nervous system, I have a place to keep coming back to, right? And when I keep coming back there, that prevents me from going down or traveling down that neural pathway that I've traveled down so much many times before that could lead me into relapse, right? And so the idea is to take it and make it into a very practical thing.
It's so potent because I also hear there's keep coming back, right? It's the center, and then I also hear almost a whisper as well of like keep coming back to the sangha, right, as well, keep coming back to the community.
That's right.
Will you talk about that a little bit, about the communal aspect of recovery?
Absolutely. Right. One of the things that we always say, really beginning and end of Y12SR meetings, is something that I've heard very much in 12 steps, right? That recovery is one of those things no one can do for you, that we all need to do our own work. And there's that and again. And you can't do this one alone. You can't do this one alone, right? Community is such a huge part of the whole thing, right? Finding and being in Sangha, a 12-step meeting for me was always a Sangha, right? It really was. It was a place that I could walk into and really identify. I could find myself in that place. And I didn't have to do a whole lot of explanation. I didn't have to do a whole lot there didn't even have to be a whole lot of language. I can tell you as an example of this being true. This was probably maybe 5 years ago now. I was in Cuba, and I don't speak fluent Spanish at all, right? But I go to a 12-step meeting in Cuba, right? Right? And it's so funny. I know exactly what's happening. I know the exact words. The fact that I'm there, I'm welcomed, and applauded for being there. And I don't understand a single solitary word of what's going on, right? And then we had some from the 12-step community come to a Y12SR meeting which was in English, right? And they weren't very fluent in English, right? And it was the exact same thing, right? And so is that, I know I can identify, even when the language isn't the same. And that's such an important part of healing. It's such an important part of healing to have the community.
So I'm not educated or phrased in addiction, but I know that isolation, heartbreak are parts of addiction, right? Or maybe roots of addiction.
Yeah.
I heard there was a study, of course, they did with rats, and I think they were giving them heroin, like through one of the like
Yeah.
water things, right? But then they introduced this rat to, and the rat was isolated, but then they introduced the rat to community, and then it was no longer addicted. And I know that I'm not doing a good job explaining that. And it is something that I wish I knew more of. But can you speak to us of these aspects of heartbreak and isolation of addiction as well?
Yeah, and one of the things that I absolutely love um, about this coupling that we're doing in Y12SR with yoga and yoga philosophy. Really, we talk about Y12SR as this thing that connects dots from several different areas, and I love that idea of dot connection. And so the dots we're looking to connect are yoga philosophy and practices, trauma healing, 12-step and other cognitive work, right? 12-step and other cognitive work, right? And neuroscience, right? What is actually factually happening in our brain relative to addiction. And really overall, we look to connect all those dots. And for that, kind of to get at what your question and what we were speaking about there, we love to take this bigger view of what addiction is, right? And so, because Y12SR is not just about alcohol and drugs, and even beyond addictive behaviors like gambling or so beyond just substance, it's also has to do with, really, we love to talk about it at getting at the root of addiction. And I would assert, right, going back to the Yoga Sutra. So this is this piece of that thing. Going back to the Yoga Sutras is that at its heart, that's what Patanjali is saying, right? When we start talking about avidya, right? Avidya in Sanskrit, this is one of what is known as the Clacias. And the Clacias are introduced in Yoga Sutra around Yoga Sutra 2.4, right? And they're introduced as seeds. And what they're introduced is the seeds of disconnection. So that's kind of what we were getting to there. These, according to Patanjali, are the seeds of how we become disconnected with ourselves, with other people in the world, with whatever it is that we speak to as higher consciousness or higher reality, how we become disconnected from those things. And ultimately, the way that Patanjali describes it is that, this is something that affects really all of humanity, right? So at its root, I would assert that we're all addicted to the way that we process our reality, right? And part of the Yoga Sutras and part of what we're doing there, it presents this framework for healing that disconnect, right? Now, it may show up in different ways in different, different bio-individual beings. So it can show up. This was one of the amazing things about my journey. Over the course of the years, I've worked in tons of treatment centers across the United States and even other parts of the world. And that are addressing different aspects of addictive behavior. So some may be addressing alcohol and drugs, right? I worked at this treatment center that was looking at food and eating disorders, right? And I was listening to someone tell their story about their behavior relative to food and eating disorder. And I was amazed because I was listening to this woman speak to her story. And it was like she was telling my story. It was like she was telling, it's like she had my childhood. Hers manifested in food, mine manifested in drugs and alcohol, right? And even when, I did a lot of work and came to a place of stabilization with the drugs and alcohol, for me, what happened was I started playing what we term whack-a-mole, drugs and alcohol. Right, right. Drugs and alcohol were stable, but then addictive sex popped up, right? I got that one stable. And then food popped up. And so the idea again is from this bigger perspective, until we get it root, right? Until we get it root, we may be susceptible to that same kind of whack-a-mole behavior, right? And so I love this from the perspective of yoga and yoga philosophy, right? It really is approaching this from this place of getting at the root. And it's not just for those it's all of us, right? It's all of us, right? Ultimately, I would assert we all become addicted to the way we process our reality, the lens through which we see things.
Yeah, and where is the disorganization, right? Where is it going to pop up?
That's right.
I really love this idea of the seeds and the Clacias. Will you tell us more about that and the work, and whether that's through an example of a class, or just through the philosophy?
I can talk about the philosophy all day and all night long. This is and I can give you some examples, right? I often love to give this example of this, because the image that I saw this that so resonated with me very long ago, and it was so funny, right? It was after that first period of relapse that I was speaking to, when I really started studying yoga, right? I really got into yoga philosophy and practices. So this was the early 90s, right? And I saw the book, The Heart of Yoga, right? And The Heart of Yoga was written by TKV Desikachar, which of course was Krishnamacharya's son, right? And so I'm reading this book, and that's ironic because the lineage that I've studied under, one of my teachers is Gary Kraftso. And Gary's teacher was actually TKV Desikachar, right? And I picked this book up long ago. It's just an example of the synchronicity of the harmony throughout the whole thing. But in this book, when in the description of the Clacias, it's described as a tree, right? And the root of the tree has 4 branches, but the root is where it really all comes from. And that root is avidya. And vidya in Sanskrit means knowledge, right? When you put the A in front of it, it means not, right? And so we got not knowledge, right? And oftentimes you hear it described as ignorance or that. And I always like to think of it when the speaking of ignorance, it's more like the ignorance of we don't know what we don't know. We're not willing to say that we don't know what we don't know. And there's a danger in that, right? A real dangerous perspective when I'm not willing to say that I don't even know what I don't know, right? And the other way I've always loved to hear it described is misperception, right? Or false understanding, right? That we actually forget who it is that we really are, or we have a false understanding or misperception about who it is that we really are. And then from there are these 4 branches, right? From that tree, there are these 4 branches. And, one of them is asmita, right? And asmita is this sense of oftentimes it's described as ego, but not good, bad, right, wrong from that perspective. It's the constructed self, right? How we construct ourselves. Like, I always think about this one. I think about, particularly now as I watch my great grandchildren, right? How, you know, when they get to be about 2 years old, the words come into their vocabulary and life changes, right? And one of those words is of course no. The other one is mine, right? And it becomes my milk, my toy, my mommy, my this, my that, right? And then and you know that suffering has occurred because you take the my away and the kid throws a fit, right? And we think that goes away, that with maturity that it goes away, but it doesn't, right? It becomes my job or my money. And you know, it even grows to a national level. My water, my land, my this, my that, right? And ultimately wars get started over that thing. And all of these things, all these different things are at its root is from this misperception. It's from this misperception, right? And then the other branches are craving, right? It's raga, attachment, right? Devesa, avoidance, right? Epinivesa, which is really fear, but it's more like, oftentimes it's described as fear of death. But if we fear death, how do you truly live life, right? It's like we got this programmatic kind of formula. We expect life to happen from this formulaic perspective. If I do this, if I do that, if I get this, if I get that, then I'll be happy, right? And life's
We might have lost her for a moment.
which is the avidya, right? And it's so interesting because the founders of the 12-step program, so it gets back to this relationship. Can you hear me, Blair?
I can hear you now.
Okay, good,
It
good,
was
good.
4 seconds that it cut out. Yeah, please keep going.
Okay, good, good. The founders of the 12-step program, when they talk about really the root of addiction, when I love to think about the Clacias, what we're describing here as the root of the problem. They're the root of the problem, according to Patanjali, right? This is the root of the problem. And the founder of the 12-step program said the root of the problem of addiction is what they call stinking thinking, right? It's what they call stinking. And avidya is stinking thinking, right? If you really get at its root, that's exactly what it is. It's stinking thinking. And the Yoga Sutras are all about mastery of the mind. They're all about the mastery of the mind, the roaming tendencies of the mind, which are the vrittis, right? It's all about mastering the roaming tendencies of the mind, right? And the 12-step founders said really the exact same thing. The root of the problem of addiction is stinking thinking, right? So our work in working with our own minds, and in the recognition that there is no separation between the brain is the master controller of the entire nervous system, right? So mind, body, and spirit, really, they're all the same thing. They're really all the same thing, right? So the whole idea of working with mastery of the mind puts us in a place where we also must work with our bodies. We also must, the way we love to talk about in Y12SR, and then I'll stop after this because I told you I can go on a tangent, right? We talk about this from the perspective of how do we build a platform for sustainable recovery, right? And that platform is based on what the yogis speak of as 5 bodies, right? And that model comes from the Taittiriya Upanishad, right? Where it says that we're not one body, but we're 5 bodies. And the 5 bodies are the physical body, which is the body made of food, right? It's the energy body, right? There's the mind, the thinking body, the intellect. There's the character, and there's the heart, not the blood pump, but the heart is the seat of love and joy and intimacy and devotion, right? And so it speaks of 5 bodies as a model, recognizing really there is no difference, there is no separation between those 5 bodies. They're really all the same thing, right? But it's a useful model in order to look at them across this 5 body, or multi-dimensional being across these 5 bodies. And we assert that if we're really going to have a platform for sustainable recovery, that it's got to address all 5 of those. It's got to address all 5 of those bodies. Yeah. So that was a long way home.
No, no.
But
I'm going to invite you to keep going too. So will you talk about how Y12SR holds all of those 5 bodies within the framework?
Yeah. So, we look to have people, because it's not the same for everybody. We're meaning that it's not necessarily a one size fits all, right? We are bio-individual beings. We are bio-individual beings, right? So what may serve you, it may look very different from what serves me, and particularly at a stage of recovery, right? Western science has talked about stages of recovery, right? So at different stages of recovery, truthfully, the tools don't change, but the way the tools are used can vary across different stages of recovery, right? So when we're looking at building a platform for sustainable recovery, one of my teachers says this oftentimes: what's in that platform? The answer is it depends, right? One of my teachers said, this is Gary, says the answer to everything is it depends, right? I love that. I love it, right? So it does depend. It depends on several things, right? The stage of recovery you might be in. It depends on epigenetic factors, right? It could depend on age. It could depend on environment. So lots of things to consider within that platform. But what happens within that platform is that it covers all 5 of those bodies, right? There's some way to address the physical body, the body made of food, right? A way to work with energy within that physical body, a way to, work with mind, the big part, working with intellect and mind, and states that the mind can, from Ayurveda, states that the mind might be in, right? How can I use a tool when my mind is in this state of lethargy, or a state of dullness, or a state of inertia? What tools are available in that moment that my mind falls into that? Or when my mind falls into anxiety and overactive, right? What tools are available when I'm aware that I'm falling there, right? So it falls, they're tools that can be really purposed across all 5 of those bodies. And so part of the work is introducing people to those tools and what will work best for them given the state of their being in that moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think I've seen that in my practice as well, is that like I get really good at using this tool, and you're like, okay, but this tool isn't gonna help me with the situation that's coming up, right? So it's
now, right?
Yeah, like I need more tools, right?
That's
You need
right.
a full toolbox, because
That's
then
right.
you can see what needs to be applied, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And support from others. This is community and support from wherever my support needs to come from, because the way that I've always learned it, A fool with a tool is still a fool,
Mm.
right? I can use a tool very foolishly. Even a tool as beautiful as meditation. And meditation is an incredibly beautiful tool. Even that can be used foolishly, right? And so, and so, it's learning this piece of how to use a tool in what in the moment that that tool is needed for support.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think, meditation can be another thing that keeps us out of our body. It can just keep us up here.
Right, right. I mean, this has happened to me, right? And I've seen it happen to others. I start classifying meditations good or bad, right? Okay, I saw the lights and the shiny stars, and I went there with that one, and then it didn't happen the next time I meditate. Oh, that was a bad and I'm back in the whole duality all over again, right? you know?
I love it because a partner about a decade ago that I had that introduced me to Buddhism, and it was before I had a meditation practice. But he would go and sit for 20 minutes, and then he would come out, and my sweet young self, I'd be like, "How was it?" And his response always was, "I'll tell you in 10 years."
I love it.
Yeah, I really love that. So yeah, that made me think of that.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And so I think maybe I'll ask you one more question before we open it to our audience. I'm really excited to hear what our audience wants to hear from you as well. But I would love to hear. So you talked to me in the pre-meeting about the 12 steps and how it was this kind of ship that was
Yeah,
moving forward, and these foundations that you build on top of each other. Will you
yeah,
tell our audience about that?
absolutely, absolutely. That is a metaphor that I heard in teachings, that I received in the Vini Yoga tradition. And the way it was described to me, and this is kind of the foundation on which we built Y12SR. The way it was described was it was through this metaphor about the ancients and how they would have a vessel, meaning a container, a vase, or some kind of container to carry liquid that was precious for them from one location to the other, right? So they had this metaphor around imperfect vessels because that was going to hamper them from getting what they needed from this liquid from one location to water or whatever it was, from one location to the other. And so they talked about the first imperfect vessel is the upside down vessel, right? And of course the upside down vessel can't hold the liquid, right? And my teacher was talking about these vessels and giving this metaphor. And when he said vessel, the image in my head, instead of a container, went to a ship, like a ship in the ocean, right? And what this really is a metaphor for is us. We're the vessel, right? We are the vessel. We hold spirit. We're the vessel through which spirit works, right? So if the vessel's upside down, and my image went to this ship that was upside down in the water, totally upside down in the water, right? And when he said that and gave that that first idea about that, the other place my head went to is that was me, right? For 34 years in the throes of addiction, I was this vessel through which spirit couldn't work. I was upside down in this water. I was upside down in this water, right? And then I started seeing how these dots connected with the 12 steps, right? Because the first 3 steps of the 12-step program are how you find foundation again. how you support that vessel being turned back right side up, right? How you find that foundation, right? And so that's the work. That's the cognitive work of those first 3 steps. Finding foundation once again. First, I had to recognize that I was upside down in the water, and then I needed the support to find the foundation to be turned back right side up. Then once the vessel's right side up, right, the metaphor from the ancient, the vessel could be dirty, or the vessel might be, even though it's back right side up, right? Now it could be dirty and leaky. Well, again, that was me, right? When my vessel was back right side up, but I had been in the water upside down for 34 years. So, you know, there's a bunch of crap and the vessel was very leaky as a result of being upside down for that period of time. The second set of steps in the 12-step program, steps 4 through 9, really are about how you clean that vessel out. How do you prepare that vessel again for sale? It's often called the work that those are called the action steps, right? And so this is the work where you start to go deep into what it was, where this filth and all this stuff came from, right? And because we also take this same metaphor, if you will, on the mat, right? So foundation is, again, whatever touches the earth. In any posture you're in, it's your base or foundation, right? The second set of work, that's step 4 through 9 work, on the mat, we call that core, right? That's the work of reclaiming self. It's the work of core. And in Y12SR, when we talk about core work, we use a lot the work of Thomas Myers. And I don't know if you know Thomas Myers, but he's an anatomist that the work, most famous piece of his work is called Anatomy Trains. And what he's working really deeply with is connective tissue, right? Working really, really deeply with connective tissue. So we work deeply with connective tissue from the mat perspective, because this is the piece of us that allows us to really, it's the piece of us where the issues in our tissues really live, right? Where it really lives is in our connective tissue, right? So in this piece, we're doing that kind of work to begin to release what even is held in our bodies, right? The cognitive work, so we're combining the cognitive work with the somatic work. And then the last steps are steps 10 through 12. So now my vessel's back right side up. I've done this work to clean it out and prepare it for sale, right? The last piece of this is, how do we set sail on our spiritual voyage, right? How do we set sail on our spiritual voyage? So we often they're often called in 12 steps the maintenance steps, but we love to speak of these as this work as the sustainability pieces, right? These are the sustainability pieces. Cognitively is done with steps 10, 11, and 12 in 12-step work, right? We love to think about this, really this whole metaphor, much like what Patanjali describes in Yoga Sutra, actually 246, 247, 248. And it gets back to what we were talking about. 246 talks about 2 attributes to posture, right? And they're defined in the middle. That's stability, right? And ease. That sense of, that's finding the middle and softening the grip, right? So stability and ease. And the idea is that we can walk in all the postures in our life, the things that come up in our life, that we can keep coming back to finding this sense of stability and ease in our life, right? And that's part of the sustainability, right? How do we keep coming back? So we're working with this from, from that perspective on the mat in in our bodies, working with it from that perspective, in as we walk off the mat and into different areas of our lives. And using that kind of metaphor, we use foundation, core, expression, right? That's the way we phrase it: foundation, core, expression. And use that as a framework for all the training, right? For everything that we do, we keep coming back to foundation, core, and expression.
It is so rich. This work is so beautiful and so amazing, and I know that thousands and thousands of people are just so lucky that that you took your lived experience and really created a container for others to flourish. And so I, for one, am just so grateful to now know you, and I'm so looking forward to continue to learn from you. And I know that our audience is grateful as well. So I just wanted to say thank you again for coming on and talking to us about the work of Y12SR, and your own personal experiences too. And I know that I could be on here all day asking you questions, but I want to give our audience an opportunity to engage. So thank you everyone who's been saying and kind of engaging in the chat. But now is the time. If you do have any questions for Nikki, there's a black bar down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and at the right corner there's a little box that says Q&A. And so you can put your questions into this Q&A box, and we will read them out and ask Nikki anything that you wish. Okay, this is great. We have one question coming in now. I have a meditation practice for a long time, but no physical yoga. Is the physical postures essential?
I don't know about essential, right? What I would assert, right? I have to say it depends, because there are people who may be prohibited in some way from doing physical postures, and that doesn't mean that you can't find recovery, right? That doesn't. So I wouldn't want to assert that. I know from my own experience, and again with working with hundreds and hundreds of people over the course of these years, that there's another possibility of opening. There's another possibility of expansion. There's a possibility for a lot more integration if you have a way to work with the physical body, right? A way to address all 5 of those bodies that I was speaking about: the physical body, the mental body, the emotional body, the character, and the spiritual heart. Right? If I can bring those into integration and harmony and all of those things, I walk in the world in much more of a sense of wholeness.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I think meditation was and is my first love, and had served me and really brought me back to presence, right? But I think through a physical practice, I love this explanation of opening up.
Yeah.
I feel like it's an opportunity to explore mindfulness and maybe the way that we do things in a way that meditation might not, because it does give you an opportunity to be in process.
Yeah. I love that explanation. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question from Doe. First, I thank you deeply for your practice, service in our world of compassion and action. Your story resonates and inspires many folks. My question is, how did your somatic experience practitioner training come about in your life, and how has it affected your healing journey as a human being in self-exploration?
Thank you for that beautiful question. Somatic experiencing was this other thing that opened up, right? A whole lot more. So, just in case people are unfamiliar with somatic experiencing, it's the trauma healing methodology that was developed by Dr. Peter Levine. And Dr. Peter Levine, a lot of people know Bessel van der Kolk, right? And his work with even yoga and trauma healing. And Dr. Peter Levine is a cohort and a collaborator and many other things with Bessel van der Kolk. And it's the methodology that I came to study. And what he and Dr. Levine has every letter in the world after his name. I mean, he's a psychotherapist and an internist and on and on and on and on and on. But in his work, he started in this trauma healing work by working with animals in the wild. And what was discovered was that animals in the wild, while routinely affected by traumatic events, don't suffer from trauma, right? And I always say with that, there's no possum Prozac, or there's no polar bear Paxil, or there's no zebra Zoloft, right? Right? There is puppy Paxil, right? But that's a domesticated animal versus an animal in the wild, right? And so you see all this film in Dr. Levine's work, and the one that really got me the most was when I watched the possum, right? And in this film, the possum could sense, really, and I love thinking about this because we're speaking about mammals and we forget that we're animals, right? We often want to put ourselves above, but they have the same nervous system reaction, right? And so you see the way that the possum reacts, and then you think and compare about that. The possum ends up, when he recognizes that finally in this thing he's out of danger, he moves and he shakes, right? And he gets all those chemicals, the cortisol, the adrenaline, and all that stuff. When he thought he had to fight or flee, right? He gets all that stuff out of his body, right? And we don't do that. We rationalize it and justify it away, all of those things. And where did those chemicals go? They go someplace, right? They're in our tissues, right? We don't move, we don't shake, we don't do anything. So in this training, as I was watching that, I became aware of how it was possible to safely structure that same kind of work in a yoga practice, right? So very often when we do this thing in the practices that we call repetition and stay, and repetition retrains our neuromuscular patterning, right? Those habits, the conditioning, the samskaras that we may have developed and put in neuromuscularly. So we look to change the neuromuscular patterning. Stay, however, works with our physiology and our psychology, right? And so very oftentimes in those holds or in those stays, there might be a little bit of what quaking, right? Resma Minikum calls this quaking or muscle tremor, right? And setting the conditions up right, knowing when, because in these classes in Y12SR, setting it up as trauma informed, you always can quit, right? One of the things we teach, and really as far as an embodiment, is the wisdom to know the difference, right? And the wisdom to know the difference is that place between too much, between not enough, because if you do too much, you risk injury. If you do too little, you risk atrophy, right? And we're looking for that place right in the middle. That's fine in the middle again, right? That place where is the wisdom to know the difference. So you can always stop. But the inquiry is when that tremor is happening, right? can I stay with it and just investigate it and be there with it, right? Those are actually, if I create the space for that to happen, those are some of the issues living in our tissues, right? That's what's being released in those. And it's as long as it doesn't affect the joint, you know, when it affects the joint, you've gone too far. But it's just within that tissue. I'm doing what the possum was doing when it was moving and shaking and doing that release. It's part of it. And the beautiful part of it is I don't have to relate it back to, Blair mentioned earlier, re-traumatizing, right? And sometimes when I tell the same story, you know, if I'm in a certain setting, I tell the same story over and over and over and over again, it starts to if the setting's not right, then it starts to a re-traumatization. One of the beautiful things about this coupling is that I don't have to relate it to anything mentally. I can just allow whatever's there to release and be with it as I safely allow this release. So I don't have to go back to, okay, this is happening because, you know, I felt neglected as a child, or this is happening because of some other circumstance. It's just the energy of this. And, you know, if you really think about trauma, trauma is stuck energy. It's a samskara. It's stuck. It's energy that can't move, that's stuck, right? So giving us a way, even in this place of our bodies, to release this stuck energy, right, offers us, again, support in healing trauma. It offers a whole nother level of support in healing trauma. And this is what I got from Peter Levine's work. It's what I got from somatic experiencing, and recognizing that there was a way to translate that into part of the yoga practice.
And I like, so it feels like the opportunity for the tremor to come is that you've created a container.
Yes.
That it can safely oscillate within.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And it always is about me creating that container of safety for myself, right? And that's part of building resilience. That is part of, you know, building a container that is safe, that I can determine is safe for me in order to allow this healing to occur. You know, and in many ways, that's what I would assert yoga is really about, right? That's Yoga Sutra, this 113, 12 and 13, the abhyasa and vairagya, right? You know, abhyasa, it's oftentimes translated as practice, but the question becomes, with that practice, what? What are we practicing, right? And my teacher says, what we're practicing is how to create for ourselves, to work with what we want to return to, a peaceful flow of inner awareness, right? That's what we're practicing. How can I keep coming back to a peaceful flow of inner awareness, right? And vairagya has been described in a way out. It's refinement, right? It's subtract. What do I need to do? How do I need to refine? What do I need to let go of in order to create this peaceful flow of inner awareness, right? What do I need to, maybe the things I need to detach from, that I need to let go of in order to create a peaceful flow of inner awareness, right? And so that's what we're keeping coming back to on the mat.
And I hear that as grace.
Yeah. Absolutely grace. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. And, you know, I always think about that when I think about grace. I often asked about forgiveness and that whole idea of forgiveness, right? And it's kind of the same thing. I can set up the environment for that, right? It's like tending the garden. right? I want to go out and I tend the garden and, make sure there's sunlight and make sure the weeds are gone and all of those kinds of things. But truth is, I can't make shit grow, right? I don't have the juice. It takes a whole nother level of connection and grace in order for things to grow. So it's exactly that. Can I build this container, right? Can I do the things on me to do relative to this? And yeah, it's so that spirit can move, so that spirit can move.
Oh, and we have more questions, but and it's like it's tending to the causes and conditions of our life.
That's right.
Yeah,
I love it.
so beautiful, Nikki. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because this is amazing, and I know that we have more questions too from our audience. Okay, Kevin asks or says, I learned meditation and yoga in recovery 6 years ago. What
Oh.
was the biggest obstacle you encountered when you first learned to quiet and calm your mind?
To I had this expectation, right, that my mind would ever be calm and quiet, and I wanted to rush it and I wanted to force it and all of those kinds of things, right? And that didn't serve me very well. I've always loved this phrase. I think I heard it in 12-step programs, is that expectations are resentment under construction, right? So I had this big resentment, right? That my mind wouldn't get quiet. And so I was in this constant argument with this whole thing. So it was my expectation around this, around all this stuff. And when I was able to more consistently let go of an expectation around it, then there was space for grace. Then there was space for something to happen that I thought I was forcing to happen.
I mean, I wrote that down. That's so big, right? Because it's like it's we're making almost like another enemy. It's like we're creating battle.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, thank you. Tiffany asks or says, I've been sober almost 8 years. Congratulations. Yep. I absolutely want to take a moment to acknowledge that. I have been sober for almost 8 years. What is your best advice to keep sobriety a priority long term?
Yeah, it was interesting. My first relapse was after 8 years of recovery, right? And what I've discovered is kind of talking about stages of recovery. And this is loose. It's really loose. But there's first stage recovery, right? And that's when I'm really coming into things. Second stage recovery, usually somewhere around year 6 to year 8, right? That second stage recovery. And I would assert in that stage of recovery that there's a bridge that to cross, right? Or a chasm, if you will, to cross. And if not attended to, right? If not paid attention to, that it's a place where it's pretty easy to fall into relapse, right? By that time in my recovery, so I was saying before, I'd gone back to school. I got all these great degrees and jobs and, doing all the stuff. I got my kids back. Because my kids were separated from me. So I got my kids back. I got my car back. I got the house back, right? I got all the bling, right? All the shiny things back, right? And then I started thinking that I wasn't an addict. I started thinking, I'd solved this thing. I had recovered and solved this thing. And I got a little full of myself, right? Got a little full of myself. That's the way I always love to phrase it. And it's easy to do that, right? It really is. And so there is the big gap there that has to be crossed, and it's really addressed in the 12 steps, right? So in the 12 steps, where I would assert that you really live is step 6 and 7. That's where you spend the most amount of your time. And it's in step 6 and 7 where you discover the samskaras, right? You really discover the deep level of conditioning and patterning and all of those kinds of things, right? You know, and I would, going back to kind of the Yoga Sutras, I think Patanjali is saying the same thing here, right? That at the root of avidya, how we really work with this is by examining our conditioning. And I would assert, you know, and this comes from my teachers, examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom, right? Examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom, right? And that's what we're doing. And we start to discover the real root of that stuff is step 6 and 7. And the real purpose of that, all the steps prior to that, right? 1 through 5, 6, all there. You're dealing with the personal, the I. Then you cross that bridge, you got to come to the we, right? The I must become the we. The personal must become the collective, right? It has to come to another point. And many times we can get so absorbed in the I, in the navel gazing and to all the things related to the I, that we don't make that successful crossing to the we. And when that happens, my experiences and what I've seen over the years is that you begin to dry up like a grape on the vine, right? If the I doesn't turn into a we, if it doesn't become the collective, right? And, you know, I was in this study group, we were looking at the Upanishads, right? And we were looking at the Vedas, this huge volume of work, that is the Vedas. And my teacher said, right, you could really sum up the Vedas in the first and the last one, right? And the first one talks about how we got to do this work personally, right? And the very last of the Vedas starts talking about you do this work personally so that you can do this work collectively, so that this transforms into the collective. So, you know, making that way across that bridge, right, between the personal and beginning to work truly in the collective, I would assert really is the key to that whole thing. And it's like I said, I've seen before how that's a chasm that is easy to drop into, and then relapse happens as a result of not making that crossing.
Thank you. And it ties in perfectly with this next question as well. Well, yeah, I also hear it's like an opportunity to dedicate all of your previous hard work to supporting others.
Right. Sustainably, right? And knowing what that means. And it takes that work of the I, right? That deep level of work in order to have that be sustainable. You know, as we move into other things. I tell people all the time, you're still dealing with addiction, cunning, baffling, and powerful, right? Real seductive, all of those things, right? So that's why I do this deep level work, right? So I know that I'm prepared coming into other work.
The next question is, did you ever have difficulty with the decision not to remain anonymous? I know that we can do so much good by sharing our stories and experience.
Yeah. What I remain anonymous about, I honor the 12-step program, right? I honor the 12-step program. What I usually don't talk about is what 12-step programs specifically, that, because I want to honor the anonymity of that program, right? So I don't talk about which 12-step program specifically that I work with. I just say that 12 steps were a source of my healing, right? Have been a source, a big part of my healing journey. So in the anonymity, I honor that program as an anonymous program. I don't have any problem speaking about my life and about my experience, from the hopefully the perspective to encourage people to, in some way. I always say, you know, I would assert that if I could do this shit, anybody can do it. If I can do this, then anybody can do it. And I, you know, I want to offer people the light and the hope shot that this is available for anyone who wants it.
Thank you, Nikki. And I do want to honor time. We have 2 more questions. Are you available?
I'm so available. I can't believe it's already 1:30. It seemed like this time just flew.
So so quick. Thank you. And these feel like really great questions. So do you have any suggestions when women in incarceration share that after a yoga class, they return to their cell and are deeply affected by feelings of shame following their practice? Many have shared that they feel very vulnerable to negative feelings surrounding the consequences of their addiction on themselves and their loved ones.
Yeah, wow. That's a deep one. It really, really is. If, you know, I always think about finding a way to honor what it is that you know, what part of me, there was a part of me that supported me to survive, that did what I did, right? When I, you know, I always say thank God for drinks and drug and alcohol in my life, because I, you know, I started drinking and drugging when I was 14 years old. 14-year-old Nikki did not have the tools, did not have the capacity to deal with early childhood sexual trauma, right? Didn't have the tools and capacity to deal with it. Thank God for drugs and alcohol, right? And guess what? They worked till they didn't. It worked till it didn't, right? So, you know, I honor the fact that it got me to a place, because I didn't have the capacity to deal with that, right? And for me, that took a lot of the shame out of that. So finding a way, here I go, here's Yoga Sutras again. This is Yoga Sutra 233, right? And what it speaks to from a Western psychological point of view is cognitively reframing the whole thing, reframing that whole thing. So when I could reframe what happened in that instance to a part of me, that there was a part of me that was trying to save my life, right? There was a part of me that was being so protective to save me, that engaged in those behaviors, right? Then I could find a way to honor her, right? I could find a way to honor the 14-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 16-year-old. She was working to save my life, right? And so that's part of that integration of all those parts, welcoming and entertaining her too. So there's a way that we can look at that from, you know, and it's as if you turn it around. My prayer for that, I'm big into prayer and chanting and all that kind of thing. It actually comes from the Course in Miracles, right? And the prayer is a little simple prayer. It's help me to see things differently. Help me to just turn this around and see where that was actually a part of me that was looking to save me, to heal me, right? If I can get to that, that's what took a lot of the shame out of this thing. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Thank you. And wait, go back to here. Okay. This attendee is wondering if you have any thoughts or tips on supporting a loved one in our lives who are starting the path of healing from trauma and addiction. One approach to this question would be, how might our own yogic practices inform how we best support them? So yeah, advice to supporting our loved ones.
Yeah. And it kind of depends on where your loved one is in this journey. If if there's a willingness already, in order to or a recognition or a desire for something different, right? That's one thing, right? There's one way to approach it in that. If it's the other way, right, it's difficult to tell someone that is not, that can't see it at this point in time, that it looks like from an out perspective that there's a problem, right? I always say, have you ever tried to tell an alcoholic or someone who clearly has a problem with alcohol that there's a problem, right? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So what in a situation like that, what I've learned how I've learned to approach it and work with is to, if a person is willing and we've already developed the depth of relationship enough, with permission, that they will allow me to tell them what I see. Not to say that that's what it is, but I can say, this is what I notice. This is what I'm observing. This is all those kinds of things, right? And tell them what I see and say, I may be completely wrong, but this is what I see. And then I will simply say something like, if you are ever looking for support or help or something in any way, I'm your girl. You come to me, right? I can support you. But it's difficult to support somebody who doesn't want support, who's not willing and open for anything else. So I just let them know that I'm there, right? That I'm the one that's there. So I hope that was helpful in some way. It's, yeah.
Yeah, and I hear, part of, from what you share, part of your own practice is also like living in honesty, right? Like if you weren't already a previous honest person, and then approaching someone that might have a problem, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Not going to work.
Right. Yeah. Right. So that's exactly it. And like I say, if they're willing to sit and listen, I can tell them what I see from the lens that I'm looking through. And then I just let them know, anytime you're ready, anytime that you need support in this, you come here, I can support you. Yeah.
Thank you. That does round out our time for questions. I look forward to having you on again, hopefully, so that we can continue the depth of these conversations. Your lived experience, your study is so valuable, not just to me, but to our whole community and all of the people that we serve and support. Is there anything that you want to end today with, something that we hadn't touched on?
All I want to say is I'm grateful too, deeply, deeply, deep. And gratitude is such a important quality to cultivate for sustainable recovery, right? I've learned that when I can make my gratitude bigger than my fear, or make my gratitude bigger than here's one, when I make my gratitude bigger than my opinion, right? when, when I make my gratitude bigger, right, there's a space that opens up. So cultivating gratitude. And right now I'm feeling a lot of gratitude for Prison Yoga Project, right? We're a part of the same overall umbrella under Y12SR and Prison Yoga, over that same overall umbrella, and have been for years. And I just so appreciate the work. And you know, James and I talked forever about doing some things together, and I'm sure, I know that that time is gonna come. Our work overlaps so deeply, but I'm really, really, really grateful for all the work that Prison Yoga Project does. My heart is there, absolutely. I have a dear friend who I want to honor, who died in the prison system. You know, a incredibly witty, wonderful, a very beautiful man who ended up dying in the prison system. And you know, for years I've been with him in his journey through that whole thing. So I honor the work that you do so deeply. It has a very, very, very deep and special place in my heart. So thank you.
That has absolutely left me speechless. Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you for the work that you do for yourself and all beings. And I definitely know that we will absolutely continue to collaborate and build, you know, to really be of benefit to all beings. So again, thank you so much for taking the time for being with us here today.
You're so welcome. I have no doubt we'll do this again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you, everyone.